Question for you today. Are you in leadership for the long game? I think it's you, Bill, who says leadership is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
So do us the favor of explaining that just briefly before we jump into this idea. Today we're talking about leadership as a long game, with Bill's quote kind of being the catalyst. Leadership is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, if you compare it to management, right? You're trying to achieve some business goals and objectives, and maybe personally you're trying to get a promotion or a bigger salary or recognition or the better parking spot, right? But if it's a long game, if it's not that sprint to those short-term objectives, the long game is investing in others, right?
Which is our motto here at the Value Added Podcast.
Adding value to others.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. We want to level up your influence so you can add value to others and help change lives.
Right.
And that's people, that's relationships, that's hard. That's not something you fix in one go. That's something, it's a long game. No matter what organization you're in or objectives you're trying to have for that organization, people are involved. So it is very much a long game in developing those people skills.
So if that's true, which obviously Bill and I believe that it is, the question then becomes, how to actually run the leadership marathon and do it well.
Yeah, and I think marathon's a really good analogy for
It
this,
is.
right? So what do marathon runners do? Well, they train, they practice, they have coach and so forth. So the question comes for us, usually, we got three analogies when we want to use in regards to leadership being the long game. The first one is the marathon. They train. Marathon runners train. They get out there, they have a coach, then they're consistent about it, and they do it regular. So the question is, as leaders, are we equipping ourselves?
Yeah.
I have met leaders who never read books, not very much. And I have, in my mind, leaders are readers. Or in other words, maybe you're not really into reading books, but you're a learner, right? You're looking to learn about leadership. And I've had one leader tell me, well, I just learn on the job. And I said, well, then you got your own echo chamber in your own headspace about what you're learning, and you're limited to just that. But if we're looking to seek and grow, that's that training aspect of that marathon. Am I doing it regularly on a regular basis?
Yeah.
So what about coach? Jared, do you have any good coaches in your life you could talk about as an analogy?
Obviously we've done this before. We use the sports analogy. So for me, I think of the coaches I've had over the years, and then the coach I just recently got to partner with and do the coaching myself.
Yep.
There's many things that come to my mind when I think of coaching that kind of parallel really well with my leadership journey. And part of that we've discussed before is, people like my dad, people like you, Bill, and a couple of others that, on the regular, I'm bouncing things off of, I'm talking to, and that I consider, even though I'm at the same level-ish, if you will, of like, hey, this is your leadership journey, this is my leadership journey, we're in this together, I still look at that as coaching. I'm still able to say, oh man, that was a really good piece of advice, or, kind of hold the bat this way instead of that way, those kinds of things. My dad's still doing it for me, Bill's still doing it, got one or two other people that I'll run things by, and it's huge to have that. And to remain a student of leadership in that specific way, where you have other people who actually have been in the game longer than you have. And then when you think of what a coach does for an athlete, it's everything from, helping with them to stay motivated.
Right.
It's them helping with their technique. It's them, going back and looking through videos with them and critiquing things.
Right.
It's advice. So there's so many different parallels within leadership of actually having a coach.
And I also want to say, I think it's healthy to have not just a coach. You want to have multiple coaches who are moving in and out of your life. You take their best tools from their toolbox, add it to yourself. And there are coaches I've had, I consider them my coaches, I've never met. And we've talked about this a little bit before. Maxwell, our favorite leader, read so many of his books. I feel like he's had such an impact on my life as a result in regards to developing and growing
And how
as a
you
leader.
now do things as a leader.
Right, but there's people that you will never meet in my life, in my past. Ron James, Greg Meserole, Scott Sullenberger, and a whole host of other people who just had a positive impact in my life in a personal way.
Exactly.
And that taught me people skills, how to treat, how to act, how to respond, how to not react, but respond in this circumstance versus that circumstance. And that's just ongoing. Even now, there's podcasters I've listened to in the past, and life circumstances have come up recently, and I'm going back and remembering their episode and go, yeah, I need to go apply this in the circumstance now. Because I think it's more than just one coach and one type of coach. I think ideally,
multiple.
You want to have a personal relationship, face-to-face coach. That's got to be the standard, the given, someone you're meeting and talking with to flesh out the leadership life in the race. But I think there's other hosts of coaches that we can draw on just to continue. So we're not limited to just our own echo chamber as we grow and develop our leadership skills.
There's also this whole idea of knowing your terrain that I want to jump into and before we just get into that in and of itself, knowing your terrain for an athlete, talk about the marathon runner, kind of knowing the race, knowing, the roads he's going to be running, or if you're a trail runner, you got to know the trail. Talking about knowing the game, whatever game you're doing, football, baseball, whatever, you got to know the terrain, you got to know the game. It's the same with leadership. And I love the idea of multiple coaches because you may be super, super familiar with some terrain as a leader, and then another leader, another coach will be super familiar and have some awesome advice with another terrain that I'll face in my leadership journey that maybe you haven't faced as much. And so that's an idea, another parallel with just, number one, we as leaders need to know the terrain if we're going to be in this for the long haul, but also coaches will have different perspectives on the different terrains we're going to face.
Our context grows, right? As we learn from those different experiences people have had.
Absolutely.
And strengths and frankly, weaknesses. Maybe someone's not so well and we learn from their mistake, right? But then we have those coaches, multiple coaches who have these strengths that we just kind of absorb those tools.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but terrain, flesh that out a little bit more. Every race, every marathon has a course, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I did a Spartan race a number of years ago with a couple of friends and my wife and I, and it was one of those things where it would have been a lot easier if we could have walked the course before we ran it, because we were told, hey, you're going to start off by sprinting up this ski slope, and then you're going to go into the woods and run a half a mile or a quarter mile, whatever it is, till you get to your first obstacle. It's a bar about 6 feet high. You got to lift each other over it, whatever it is. Then you're going to carry sandbags, and you're going to carry buckets. Then you're going to do the wall, and then you're going to swim through this thing of mud and all this different stuff. And I kind of wish, we did it and we did okay, and we finished and we celebrated and all, but that terrain was so difficult. And if I could have walked it, I could have actually mapped out in my mind, okay, this is going to be the area where I'm going to be running hard and fast. This is the area I'm going to slow down to in preparation for this obstacle. Yeah. This is how I'm going to attack this obstacle.
Yeah.
Right. But they don't give you that information up front. They just kind of tell you these are some of the things you're going to face. And so if I could have walked and mapped out the course as best I could, talked to other people who have done these before, like if I was going to do a Tough Mudder or another Spartan race, this is what I would do. Talk to as many people as I can. And of course, part of doing that is they don't want you to know. They want to surprise you and they make it difficult for you. Yeah. So I know it can be somewhat of a weak analogy. I get it. But knowing the terrain would have been so much easier, or made it so much smoother, I think, in my mind. But when I parallel that to my leadership journey, for me, I'm in the ministerial services. I'm a pastor, or whatever you want to call it. And knowing the terrain for me is knowing which specific ministries I'm overseeing and how those ministries need to look, and actually knowing the people in those ministries. Is so much terrain there. Yeah. And then knowing how to approach that is super, super important for me.
Yeah, two thoughts on that. On the most recent comment there is you're overseeing these different ministries or groups or programs, projects.
What works in one is not going to work in the other.
Right? But understanding how that impacts the rest of the organization can be utterly key to the overall organization's success. So knowing your piece of the race, maybe you got a baton to hand off at a certain point, but knowing your corner of the race really well is going to be key. And then the other comment I have is, that you were talking about knowing the race and wishing you could walk it ahead of time, just get your mind ready for those different parts.
Exactly.
I used to volunteer for a friend who was a race director. He would set up and run 5Ks, half, full marathons, even a 50K up and down around a ski resort during the summer just for endurance runners. And and in observing all these races, I learned it is much a mental discipline
It is.
as it is a physical discipline.
Absolutely.
Being able to push yourself through different parts of the course. So, and that's just another aspect of leadership. There are conversations I know I'm going to be having that I need to prepare for, or circumstances around which I need to move the organization or individual through, that I'm preparing some thoughts and ideas in advance to go into those events, conversations, or
And
activities.
this is part of reading
Yes.
in my mind, because when you're able to read, again, you're getting perspectives and knowledge from people who have been in this terrain long before you have.
Yeah.
So you're learning their lessons, their advice, their
Yeah.
perspective, their wisdom and knowledge, and you are able to kind of prep your mind. I wish I did more training for what I'm doing now before I started doing it. A lot of my training was on the job training, and I could have avoided attitudes and a little bit of my reacting instead of responding. You know, if I had been somewhat a little bit more prepared for some of what I've faced. But yeah, again, know your terrain as best you can. If you got to read to do that, read to do it. If you need to get a coach, a few coaches, go grab some coaching. There's nothing. I mean, there's leadership programs you can do.
There are, you'll find a whole host of options online. Either other YouTubers who have Maxwell Institute has a wonderful program. Of course, all their books. So
And
there's a lot of resources.
the other thing I want to make sure we flesh out just for a minute here, Bill, is, you know, this whole question comes to mind. Are we willing, if we're going to train regularly and consistently, what does that look like? You know, is it, hey, maybe I need to schedule some time during my week to actually meet and sit with someone I would consider a coach, or to take a leadership class, or to make sure I have 2 hours, you know, every week to read leadership? I mean, what would that look like?
Yeah,
I know we talk about leadership growth programs for
absolutely.
ourselves or plans, but
I'll just share what I do, I think, and then you can build on what works best for you. I'm always in a leadership book, and I'm not reading it every single day, but I'm in there several times a week reading and learning. And then there are regular leadership podcasts that I'll look at on a weekly basis. But looking on the more annual basis, I'm always got my eye open for a leadership conference. Jerry and I were talking a month or so ago about a leadership conference coming up and whether or not we can work in our schedule to go to it now or maybe next year. And there are other conferences as well that we talked about getting certified, Maxwell certified, and when we can afford, save up and be able to pay and afford to do that as well.
We'll do that. Yeah.
So it's looking at your schedule, building a cadence and a rhythm that's a daily cadence, a weekly, monthly, and a yearly cadence for your training. So for me, I'm studying leadership every day. What am I doing every day? Well, that's going to vary. Sometimes it's a podcast, to reading a book,
Taking notes
on
what you're doing during the day sometimes helps.
In the books, we've read some books together. We've taken notes and what jumped out to us and where do I need to action.
We're doing
this.
that right now with the elders at our church.
We are, yeah. So that's kind of my approach to my training. Work up a plan that works for you. Your schedule is different than mine. Your cadence, your stage of life may be different. You have young kids, old kids. Life is just really busy.
Yeah.
Obligations, but don't not have a plan. Yeah. If you can do something once a week, that's awesome. That's great. If you can do something once a month, do it once a month, right? But least of all, find that person that you can look eye to eye and talk to about leadership and get ideas and thoughts. If that's your only, I'd say make that the priority.
Yeah, and I would just say, for me, it's resources in general. Like, you know, having Bill as a resource, having my dad as a resource, you know, having books at the ready is, you know, just understanding that I have the resources to continue to grow and then to continue to train, you know, on the daily or on the weekly or whatnot. So for me, it's just, you know, we have our own leadership growth plans. You can look back at our episodes where we talked about that. where we talk about that cadence and what it looks like. So I won't beat that dead horse, but I just would reiterate everything Bill just said about getting into a rhythm where you're training yourself, where you're being trained by others, no matter if you're one of the greatest leaders in the world or if you're just starting your leadership journey. Yeah. It's so important to continue.
Don't wait for it to feel right?
Yeah.
Because feelings come and go, and it may not ever feel right for a while. And that's what, marathon runners do. I don't feel like running today, but I want to train for this. So I have to go out today and do this.
And the thing is really, we talk about this, I think I don't think we've dropped this comment on the podcast, but there really is no excuse for us. I mean, we live in such a day and age where books, the internet alone, you could exhaust yourself.
Yeah.
So really it's just a matter of scheduling it in for yourself.
Yeah, there's more resources out there than I have time. Yeah. So I have to pick and choose.
So let's jump into this next analogy. That was our first analogy, talking about, if you're just joining us, we're talking about leadership as a long game. And we gave the idea of a marathon, gave that analogy, if we're looking at leadership, if you're in it for the long game.
Yeah.
So talk about marathon. Then we're going to talk about next, there's another analogy Bill and I were fleshing out for this episode, and that is long-term relationships.
Yep.
So like a long-term relationship, leadership is a long game. Yeah, the question then becomes, are we committed
to the relationship? Yeah, or to the aspect of leadership. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parallels. We're just going to give you three of them here. So you got commitment versus emotions. This is kind of where we're going. So flesh this out, Bill. We'll take number one here. Again, long-term relationships, long-term leadership. There's a parallel there.
Yeah. I want to set some context here. I want to back us up for a second.
Definitely do it.
So a couple of years ago, I came across this article, and the article was about, is love a feeling or is love a choice?
Yeah.
Right? And so, and this will connect. Bear with me. Give me a little wiggle room here.
Bill's going to get lovey-dovey.
Yeah. So in the article, they interviewed, I think it was like 100 young, recently married couples, and asked them, is it a feeling or is it a choice? And almost to every single couple said it's feeling.
Yeah.
And they went to the other end of the spectrum, our senior citizens who have been married 40, 50 years, still alive, still married, and then asked them, is love a feeling or is love a choice? And they, to the single, every single one of them said it's a choice.
Exactly right.
Right? So my conclusion, personally, I would say love is a choice that is accompanied by feelings. Right. There'll be days where I'll look at my wife and go, I love you. I just don't like you right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I am absolutely committed. Context, I've known my wife since she was 10 years old. I was 12 and a half, 13.
Yeah.
We've been married, just celebrated our 30th anniversary.
That's right.
So a long time, I've known her 45, 47 years.
You're speaking
now.
as a veteran, yeah.
So this is not coming from little or no experience, but it very much, they're good years, they're bad years, there's good days, there's bad days. And not only, the feelings don't always line up, but she's still my best friend, hands down. And I'm committed to that long-term relationship and making it last. So that's what we're talking about in regard, bringing that idea of commitment to leadership. And sometimes leadership is hard, doesn't feel right, doesn't feel good. But are we going to work through the emotions so we can stick with the commitment and reap the benefits of our own growth as we work through that adversary, those difficult times?
I love that whole analogy, Bill, because I was recently doing some premarital, kind of spiritual guidance. You'll have to excuse my pastoral lingo here if you're not a churchgoer. Just give me some space here. But we were asked, my wife and I were doing this session together, and we were asked by this couple. We told them to ask questions. We believe questions are valuable because we believe people are valuable. So I said, ask your questions. And so they brought some this week and this past week. And one of them was, when you guys come up against serious, or even minor to serious relational friction, meaning you're not getting along, there's something getting in the way of your relationship. What do you like? What's your default? What do you do? And, Al, my wife and I kind of just looked at each other, and so I went first, and for me, I have kind of termed it by saying, my wife and I have been married 20 years now, coming up on 20 years in a couple weeks. And I just said, we make space for grace. because we understand that we're people and we're going to irritate each other. And even after 20 years of marriage, there's going to be times where she doesn't want to talk to me. I don't want to talk to her. But we try not to obviously let that go, very long.
Right.
But sometimes we just understand, hey, we just need space for a minute here. Take a deep breath, right? And I parallel that with leadership because leadership is hard. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to be committed to Al, I need to understand there's got to be moments where, okay, I just need to take a breath. I need to take a breather here, and
the context is different, right?
it's different.
It's a different relationship, but it's still relationship orientated, and we're not talking about needing to have this lovey-dovey feeling,
right.
but you want to have at least a general sense of well-being for the people you're taking care of, because our goal as leaders is to help them rise up to their greater potential that they haven't realized they can achieve yet or not.
And it's so easy to quit.
Yeah, it is. It's so easy to give up. And there's people that I don't agree with. I frankly didn't like, but I still have to work through those emotions, but sink into the commitment of I'm for them. Yeah. I want to be their cheerleader. I want to be their coach.
Right.
I want to celebrate with them when they achieve particular
number
goals
one fan.
or promotions or whatever it is. It really is, you really have to sink into the commitment side of things as a leader because you're out for others, and people grew up in different ways, different personalities, different parents, different age groups, and they have different perspectives and decisions and priorities. But being able to respect them, who they are, and carry that commitment into that relationship, work relationship, volunteer relationship, to see their growth and hope the best and want the best for them. It's almost like parenting.
And it's, no, seriously. But it's Maxwell who I think says successful people make good decisions early in life and then manage those decisions the rest of their lives. One of my favorite quotes by him. But when you say, Bill, your relationship in like that analogy you gave is a choice.
Yeah.
That's how I look at this. If I've made a choice to, be committed to my wife, or if I made a choice to, I'm going to be a leader and I want to be in this for the long haul, I've already made that decision. I've already committed. I already said I do to my lady 20 years ago. I already said yes to leadership 30 years ago, whatever it was, 25-ish years ago. Now I have to manage that decision. Hey, I know this is what I'm doing. I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is how I'm wired. I'm leading out of my, what's that word you use? Your genius.
Oh, Working Genius?
Yeah, leading
Patrick
out of my
Lencioni has a new book, Working Genius.
Yeah, I'm leading out of my Working Genius, and we'll talk about that more later. But I've already made that decision, so now I have to manage it. But being able to take a breath, take a break for a second, rest for a minute, jump back in, totally okay. So let's flesh this out. This long-term relationship parallel with leadership that we have. We've got commitment versus emotions, and we thought this might be helpful for you. I'll give you the first one. Let Bill go with it for a second. Emotions should not dictate direction.
Right. So our emotions come and go. They're, like I said, in a marriage or in a relationship, whether it's a relationship with my spouse, with my children, with my father,
coworkers,
the feelings come and go. They wave. They're sometimes good, sometimes neutral, sometimes negative. And not that any emotion is really bad. It's learning to work through those emotions. So emotions don't dictate the direction. The commitment does.
Yeah.
Right. The commitment dictates the direction.
That's exactly right.
And it's the same thing for leadership. My commitment to the organization, the goals, the objectives, and the people I'm overseeing, and the commitment to their growth and success is what dictates the direction.
Yes.
And same with my wife. I'm committed for her and us to be together until death do us part.
So you're in it for the long game. So don't let the emotions dictate the direction. And I would say, go ahead.
Just so caution, and we're not, if you've had rough relationships, if you've had a broken relationship, broken marriage, we haven't walked in your shoes, and we know that. I have family members who have broken relationships, divorces, separation. I have friends who have. We see it. We can't speak to that. We understand there's aspects of that you've made experience that we haven't learned about yet. And please drop a comment. Let us know about that. And we're talking in generalities.
Yeah, and thank you for letting us talk in generalities.
Yeah,
appreciate that space.
And we also realize there's an exception for every generality. So again, this is kind of parable, a modern parable, and parables
sure.
are kind of like a Geiger counter. They work
Yeah.
most of the time, but not all the time.
Yeah.
So
We get it.
we get it. So just a little caveat there. We understand there's things out there that we haven't experienced that you have that, you may be sitting there thinking, going, well, if they only knew this.
Yeah. No,
So-
exactly. But yeah, so emotions should not dictate direction. And then, we say that simply because it should be common knowledge to most of us that emotions are temporary. They're going to fluctuate, like you said.
Right.
But the third thing is that emotions can, at times, if we allow it, they can overly reinforce or undercut reality. So kind of explain what that means.
Yeah. And this is the best way. When my kids were younger and they were approaching on puberty, I took them aside one by one.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, some changes are about to happen in your body that make, when you feel this happy now, you're going to feel this happy when you're going through puberty, or when you're this sad now, you're going to feel this sad when you go through puberty.
Yeah.
But that doesn't kind of stop that. I mean, emotions can taint our perspective is what I was trying to communicate to them. And that still happens to me today, and it happens to Jared and everyone.
Sure.
So the idea here is don't let the emotions overly negatively reinforce reality or make it too pie in the sky. Oh, everything's great and wonderful kind of, and when it really isn't. So just be aware that emotions can overly reinforce one way or the other,
Right.
and just be self-aware. Get a gut check. Well, that's why we say leadership. One of the reasons we say leadership is a team sport.
Exactly.
Hey, this is my perception. What's your take on this, right? And Jared and I have a conversation coming up about that very thing. There's a leadership thing happening, and I wanted his take on, and we're going to sit down in a little while and talk about that very thing. So I make sure my emotions aren't clouding,
direction,
clouding, or dictating the direction of what I'm seeing, or undercut reality is the way we're saying it.
So you've got leadership as a long game.
Yep.
You've got the parallels with a marathon, like running a marathon. You get the parallel with a long-term relationship.
Yep.
And now you've got the parallel of the long game of leadership from a military perspective. We'll just be quick on this. We just saw, some really good parallels with the long game of leadership is kind of like military. Why do we say that? Well, because there's boot camp, there's challenges, and there's missions.
Yeah.
So
boot camp challenges. And boot camp, once you break down, you had some good comments about boot camp just before we started recording.
yeah, so boot camp, I've never been, so please, thank you to all of our servicemen and women. We so value you and appreciate you. If you have a better way to say this, please chime in. Bill and I have not served in the military, so we're just doing this from a sideline perspective. So please give us some space. But boot camp for me, when I've talked to friends and family who have been in and gone through it, they really do reprogram your body and your mind. And their physique when you go in is not the same as when you come out. I had a friend who went in. He was a tiny stick figure of a dude. He came out and he was a very strong, athletic individual. And it was impressive just to see the difference between, his couple, 3 months or whatever it was of boot camp. I was blown away at the challenge and the change that he went through. But they do that with your mind as well. They break you down so that they can build you up and reprogram you. And I began to see this leadership parallel of, I went through some leadership training, and I'm in a sense, we just talked about going through it often and becoming readers and learning. And it has a way of shaping and reprogramming how you think in a good way.
Preparedness.
Yeah, preparedness. And it really prepares you for the next leadership journey. Yeah. But it also, when I've talked to people who have been on active missions, they'll say, they'll be asked, well, how did you know what to do? And they say, are you kidding me? It's programmed into me. You don't think, you just do. You just react because your body is going to react that way because you went through the training. So that's kind of a parallel of, why are they so harsh on the boot camps and training, and then they go in for, even guys who are in the reserves, they got to go in for training every month. And a friend who's doing it right now, and they stay on the top of their game so that their mind and body just responds. So
Yeah.
I see some parallels with that with leadership.
Yeah, and I'll say at my current workplace, we have a training program for workers who want to become leaders. And it's a week long, and then they get an opportunity over the next 18 months to practice what they learn on and off in amongst their normal responsibilities. And that week sets up that preparedness of this is what's going to happen, this is what you need to do, this is how you do it. And then they get into reinforcing it by actually doing it. So I think in terms of boot camp and leadership, I think there's one aspect there that maybe some organizations need to think critically about is, do we have a boot camp for leadership? Not just management, not just goals and objectives, but is there a boot camp for leadership to help prepare people to grow and develop? So
That's good.
And the next one is challenges. And simply, every military organization goes into a task or battle or
Within their mission, there are multiple challenges.
There's multiple challenges to achieve to be able to move through and get to a point of success or a win, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same for leadership. There's always going to be challenges you're going to be facing as a leader. Maxwell says, I mean, something to the effect of your best day was yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Right. There's always going to be a new challenge. And it's like, really? I have to do all this now? And we do. As leaders, we need to stand up and stand out and lead.
But like the military, we here in the value added, and people like Maxwell and others, Patrick Lencioni and others, we teach and encourage camaraderie, which means come together with other leaders,
accomplish a challenge.
And military does that. They have a group of men and women who their relationships last for the rest of their lives a lot of times because they're so connected because they were in it together. And those of us who don't serve have no idea, other than we see some parallels. But then you've got the overall mission of the military, and like a good organization, you'll have a clear mission objective. And so your boot camp and your challenges will serve to hopefully move the organization and the individuals towards achieving whatever that mission objective is.
Yeah, moving the ball down the field. And in some organizations, it's an ongoing, and the goal is supposed to keep moving, right? I think of big corporations, technology corporations are always looking for the new technology and the new goal and the new objective and to grow the business. So it can be a constant moving of that goalpost, but having the mission to move that ball that direction doesn't go away.
Exactly. So leadership is a long game. It's like a marathon. It's like a long-term relationship. It's like the military in some ways. Bill, close us out here with some thoughts just from leading from the front.
Yeah. So as we were talking about these three different analogies, the marathon, the relationships, and then the military, I came across a few ideas that kind of crystallized in my mind. As a leader, we lead from the front.
We should be.
Yeah, as Maxwell says, if you think you're a leader and no one's following you, you're just out for a walk. Kind of what that is. So we need to be the forefront. We need to be the first ones to go through, having done it. A little context here. For me, I have 25 years in the help desk industry, and I spent a number of years on the phones helping customers as a phone analyst before I moved into leadership and management there. And it was a challenge. It was hard. People called with the problems. That was my job. People called me with problems, and I had to fix their problems. But if I didn't have that experience, how well of a leader can I be to lead others through that experience? So I had to lead from the front, right? I've had to been in there and done it to really be a good leader to coach others through it. So, if you ever want to go learn how to be a scuba diver, you actually want to learn from someone who's a certified instructor and so many hours of diving before you go and learn from them.
Hopefully they're out in the front leading.
And your best friend Charlie goes, "Oh, well, I think I know how to do this. I can, you want to go with the instructor who's been there, right? So leading from the front. So you want to be able to just have someone doing that.
I was actually called out on that recently. I may have shared this before, so pardon me if I did, but we had a car wash at the church there for the youth, growing some funds to go on some missions. And I was doing overseeing the whole thing or helping to oversee the whole thing. And so I would walk around when the cars come in. I'd try and slip them the menu to the baked goods section of the car wash, try and get them to come and buy, some snacks and raise money for the kids while their car's getting washed. But I wasn't physically washing cars. And so one of my students, who's one of my senior students, and she's been a student of mine for a while, we'll call her Nancy. I don't have permission to use her name, but Nancy was like, you're not leading, Jared. You're, and she would just drop those little comments. And so I had to, okay, fine. So I kicked my sandals off to the side and I washed a few cars with her. And I was like, is that better? We kind of made a joke about, but it's important to lead from the front.
Yeah.
And, not to just be organization leaders only, but to actually get out there and do some things.
And the flip side of that is there's different roles within, the military. Even you have your tank gunner, you have tank driver, you have your rifleman.
You got to know your role, baby.
Right. And they got to know their role and how they fit together in the organization. But the leading from the front has to have the context of the different roles. And then there's common tasks so that everyone has to know, the military know how to shoot a gun. Yeah. Right. And some basic medical, how to wrap a a wound or a bandage, something like that. So there's common tasks as well that we'll all have to perform. Yeah. But this last note we'll close out on the military example is just going the extra mile. The Marines have the saying, and you probably know this, improvise, adapt, and overcome. Yeah. And as leaders, we're going to be facing just circumstances that are just, okay, this is kind of similar, but it has this new twist to it that I've never come across before. How are we going to handle this? Yeah. And then coming together, bringing your team together to discuss and adapt. Okay, how can we tackle this? We got to improvise. Right. We change, we adapt, and then we move forward to accomplish what we need to. We overcome it. Yeah. So military relationships, and again, back to the marathon, really good 3 analogies for how to be in leadership long term.
Long term, yeah. Yeah. Again, leadership is a long game. It's like a marathon. It's like a long-term relationship. It can be like the military. Yeah. We have a question we want to close out for you with. If you desire to remain in leadership, which we hope that you do, we need good leaders.
Thinking of our marathon analogy.
If you're if you desire to remain in leadership and in this race for the long haul, how will you stay hydrated? How are you going to stay hydrated? We gave a few tips of maybe a leadership growth plan for yourself, of maybe just scheduling in some time to read, maybe thinking of grabbing some coaching or some training. Let us know. Drop a comment, say, hey, this is what I do. This is what works for me. Or, hey, I'm going to start doing this because you guys made some good points. Or, hey, I've been doing this for years. We'd love to connect. But, if you're a leader and you haven't done any of these things to help yourself grow or help yourself stay committed to the long game of leadership, we would encourage you to do that.
Yeah, you'll feel refreshed if you do. Yeah,
for sure.
So thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it. We appreciate you. We hope the best for you. If there's anything or any topics you'd like us to cover, please drop a comment. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.